Welcome back to Carneades.org. Today we're going to be continuing with our series analyzing African philosophy. In this video we're going to be taking a look at what is Consciencism, the philosophy of Kwame Nkrumah. Now, Consciencism, sometimes called Nkrumanism, is a philosophy proposed by Kwame Nkrumah, a Ghanaian philosopher and politician. As with other post-colonial African philosophies and movements, such as Négritude, check out our videos on that if you're curious, it attempts to identify and capture a uniquely African philosophy. Specifically, Nkrumah attempts to reconcile what he sees as three strains of African heritage: pre-colonial African culture, Islam, and Christianity. Nkrumah's philosophy draws on the African socialism advocated by Senghor, but argues for an explicitly theistic version. Consciencism refers to the goal of assessing pre-colonial African consciousness, personality, and being. Kwame Nkrumah was a politician, philosopher, and the first president of Ghana. He was the prime minister when Ghana declared independence from Britain and went on to become president. Nkrumah was a strong supporter of Pan-Africanism. Check out our video on that for more, arguing for Africa to unite under a common socialist, centrally planned government and become self-sufficient to avoid exploitation by the former colonial powers. As with many African philosophers of the time, Nkrumah wanted to forge a uniquely African philosophy, with the hope of providing African people with an identity that was not simply forced on them by colonial masters. In doing so, Nkrumah attempted to craft a philosophy that bound together what he viewed as three components of African heritage: Islam, Christianity and Western values, and traditional African culture and beliefs. Conscientism combines elements of theism, socialism, communalism, and materialism together. Instead of attempting to profess a philosophy solely built out of pre-colonial beliefs, as many ethno-philosophers did, Nkrumah attempts to take the best of Christianity and Islam with traditional beliefs to form a new post-colonial philosophy. Unlike Senghor, who struggled to reconcile religion with Marxist materialism, Nkrumah argued that materialism and religion were not contradictory. Nkrumah's view made an explicit link between the political environment and the philosophies that underpin that political viewpoint. Given high rates of theism in Africa, a philosophy that is explicitly atheistic, such as many kinds of Marxist materialism, was politically untenable, and therefore Nkrumah tried to find a type of materialism that fit with those pre-colonial traditions that seemed to look a lot more like socialism, along with Africa's current religions of Islam and Christianity, along with traditional underlying African religions. Nkrumah argued that socialism is more in line with traditional African beliefs than capitalism. According to Nkrumah, a key component of pre-colonial African thought and culture was the intrinsic worth, dignity, and value of humans. Nkrumah contrasts this with Christian views of humans revolving around original sin and therefore not being valuable outside of a connection to a deity. Further, Nkrumah argues for an African conception of humans as all equal. There must be a communal society where overall social welfare is valued. He contrasts this with capitalist conceptions of individual value. Nkrumah argues that capitalism, feudalism, and slavery are merely matters of degree, whereas communalism and socialism are similarly on a spectrum, that slavery is simply giving someone no money for their work. Feudalism is giving them maybe a little bit of money. Capitalism might be giving them a little bit more, but you're still exploiting the working class for the benefit of the capitalist class. Whereas communalism and socialism are focused on the benefits of the group as a whole. Since pre-colonial African traditions fit on the communal end of this spectrum, they fit more with traditions of communalism and socialism. So Nkrumah claims that socialism is a better structure for African cultures attempting to reclaim their pre-colonial roots. Consciencism combines the socialist elements of Marxism with deeply theistic and spiritual components of Islam, Christianity, and traditional African religions. Nkrumah argues that, according to pre-colonial African thought, man was an essentially spiritual being. However, Nkrumah argues that this is not at odds with dialectical materialism. In Nkrumah's materialism, matter is not the sole reality, but rather the primary reality. This allows Nkrumah to explain things like consciousness and provide an explanation of spirituality within a nominally materialist framework. This seemingly contradictory view is explained through categorical conversion, where a property of a higher level emerges from actions at a lower level, i.e., a mind emergence from the actions of matter. Nkrumah explains this with reference to chemical qualities deriving from more micro-physical qualities. The physical qualities are primary, just as the material is primary. But as there is some sense in which the chemical properties are real, in the same way there is some sense in which the mind is real, despite simply deriving from the more primary physical matter of the brain. The average man is an idealization that is made up of physical individuals, but is something beyond just a collection of individuals, something idealized in some way. Now, there have been a number of objections that have been raised to conscientism. One could certainly raise any number of objections to the constituent parts of this view, either to the accuracy of theism and spirituality, to the effectiveness of socialism as a governance system, or to the methodology of using ethnophilosophy at all as a way to develop philosophical positions. We've delved into these viewpoints and their malcontents in many other videos, so we're going to focus on objections specifically to conscientism here and the way that they combine these viewpoints. One might be concerned that socialism is not particularly in line with traditional African beliefs. While some pre-colonial African cultures were certainly communal and focused on the inherent value of all humans, many were militaristic and engaged in ethnic warfare. It seems that at least some pre-colonial African cultures had less equality and more hierarchy than Nkrumah might have us believe. And while we might certainly argue that the Europeans brought a lot of that hierarchy and a lot of that militaristic nature to Africa, that doesn't mean that it didn't exist at all before, or that those militaristic cultures weren't in some ways dominant in certain parts of the continent. Though this may be more a problem with the underlying tenets of Pan-African ethnophilosophy that attempts to identify a single common culture throughout a large and diverse continent. So this may be just a problem for ethnophilosophy in general, but particularly for the idea of using ethnophilosophy to derive a specific, correct conception of what all African cultures leaned towards. One might further object to Nkrumah's metaphysics, arguing that categorical conversion is insufficient to explain the relationship between the mind and the body. Further, one might raise the concern that even if spirituality might be consistent with materialism, it seems problematic to claim that this can be made consistent with traditional Christian and Islamic notions of an eternal, ideal, explicitly immaterial God. You might be able to say that, well, we can think of things like spirits or these things as being arising from physical properties. Maybe you could understand that as at least consistent, though arguably not supported. It's hard to understand how this can be consistent with the Christian or the Islamic idea of an immaterial God that's not being made of material at all, and therefore material can't be primary. How could such a God be categorically converted from something material? This seems like another source of tension for Nkrumah. Nkrumah has often been critiqued as offering less a coherent philosophy and more a political ideology that appealed to the masses, but lacked a certain level of internal consistency or rational justification. Many Africans identified with both the communal values of pre-colonial Africa and a particular colonial religion, meaning that Nkrumah needed to create a philosophy that encompassed both seemingly conflicting strains to be politically palatable. Though Nkrumah might argue that taking into account these views should be an important part of a philosophy because of his case for a political philosophy that can be supported by the people, particularly an ethnophilosophy, attempting to encapsulate the views of a culture, there do seem to be some irreconcilable contradictions in his viewpoint that are more politically appealing for him than seem to be based on reason and rational argument. What do you think? Was pre-colonial Africa inherently socialist? Can materialism be reconciled with the beliefs about spirituality? What about with beliefs about an immaterial, omnipotent deity? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Watch this video and more here at Carneades.org, and stay skeptical, everybody.